Chapter 17 of Boruto's 2 Blue Vortex is out. Officially. And therefore, a lot of you are probably like, Nick, you waited until the official release to make your chapter review? What is this? I thought if you weren't first, you were last. And yeah, no, in this content game, if you're not first, you are last. But also when it comes down to Boruto, I want to give you guys the best possible chapter reviews I can. And I think all the leakers for Boruto may have quit or been arrested, because now the only person we have leaking Boruto content is this incredibly self-indulgent, absolutely deluded with the smallest modicum of power person called Rai on fanverse.org, who inserts fake information into the leaks as a way to get a kick at his haters or something. I don't know. It's the most fedora tipping thing I've ever seen on the internet. And thus all that came out before the official release this month was text leaks. And while the text leaks had every line of dialogue in the entire chapter, I gotta see the photos. The drawings provide an insane amount of context. I would feel as though I was cheating you as my viewer if I was to try to break down a chapter without actually seeing what was going on. So this week, we're doing it legally. Well, I mean, it's always legal, but more legally. And boy, oh boy, do we have a lot to talk about, because this chapter was a lot of talking. See, while many people, myself very much included, assumed that Chapter 17 was going to see the kickoff of the battle between Matsuri, Ryu, and Team 7, and we're going to see Kawaki force Amado to release his limiters and achieve his highest level of power. In a sense, we did get both those things, but in the same very real sense, we didn't get either of them. See, because while the conflict between Ryu, Matsuri, and Team 7 has technically begun, it started in a way that even I didn't see coming. And while Kawaki was able to get his crackly little rock hands on Amado, we don't necessarily know how that interaction is gonna go down. But some of you are probably wondering, Nick, how on earth did they manage to stall the plot for 40 pages? This chapter must be awful. And if you're thinking that, unfortunately, you're wrong. But I guess that's kind of fortunately, because it means it was actually a very good chapter. See, what this chapter lacked in blows exchanged, it more than made up for in plots advanced. See, because even though we didn't get to see Konoha use whatever newest iteration of Rasengan he's gonna try to use to defeat Matsuri in this chapter, we did get things like Shikamaru sliding into his most devious, unchecked bag in order to make sure that Konoha ends up safe and sound. Yes, this chapter may not have been packed with action, but it did show us the kind of actions that our newly crowned 8th Hokage is willing to take. And to all the die-hard Shikamaru fans out there, this chapter might just have you clutching your pearls. But to all the true die-hard Shikamaru fans out there, it's not that much of a surprise. But enough with the mysterious, because like I've already said, today we got a lot to talk about, so with no further ado, let's get right on to Chapter 17 of 2 Blue Vortex Explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Hold up, you're gonna spend a minute with me real quick, because I want to talk to you about the sponsor of today's video, Factor. Factor wants to help you take the stress and inconvenience out of mealtime, ensuring that you're still crushing your nutrition goals with enough time left in your day to do the things that you enjoy. See, unfortunately, when it comes down to it, me, Steven, Chris, and Danny don't have all the time in the world. We especially don't have enough time to goof around with each other and make videos like this if we have to spend all day cooking, prepping, and cleaning just to make a little bit of food. And that's where Factor comes into play. See, Factor keeps us going because the four of us know that we have nutritional, dietitian approved, healthy, and easy to make meals at home waiting for us whenever we need them. We get meals delivered to us by Factor every single week, and we know those meals just take 2 minutes in the microwave to prep. But Factor's got us covered with more than just lunch every single week. They also cover us with breakfast, smoothies, snacks, juices, and so much more, which takes the stress out of every kind of grocery shopping. On top of that, with Factor, we know that we're making a sustainable choice, as Factor offsets 100% of their delivery emissions and sources 100% renewable energy for the production and offices. But when it comes to food, there's a big difference between showing and telling. So let's head down to the kitchen and try some Factor meals.
Today I want to take the time to illustrate to you that HelloFresh can truly cater to any dietary restrictions by eating our 3-bean vegan chili.
Prepping this meal is the same as prepping any Factor meal. We take this slide off here, poke a couple of holes in the plastic, throw it in the microwave for 2 whole minutes. Take it out, apply our sauce here for flavor.
And that is delicious.
And more important than anything,
Easy, and also dietitian approved.
So what are you guys waiting for? Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code 50NCHammer23 to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's 50NCHammer23 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. If you started microwaving a Factor meal at the beginning of this ad, it'd be done by now, and you'd have something to eat while you watch us. So while usually we jump directly into what happened in the beginning of the chapter, first I want to talk about the cover art for this chapter. The cover art shows Ayara and Yodo, two of the new members of the New Age Sand Siblings, the people that Team 7 are collaborating with in the Hidden Sand Village to battle against Matsuri and Ryu. And like at this point, we gotta give Ikimoto his flowers. Listen, is it absolutely insane that Ayara has a whale tail as a 16-year-old? Yes, 100%. However, if you remove that aspect, Ayara and Yodo have that shit on. Like, Ikimoto's gotta be spending weekends in Harajuku or something. He's too well versed in the streetwear game. Yodo is sagging. Now, do I love Ayara's gigantic, chunky pink boots that for some reason have their toe slot cut out? No, not really. But apparently Ikimoto likes drawn toes as much as his predecessor Kishimoto, so the boots get holes cut in them. Suck it up, I guess. Anyways, chapter 17 kind of starts off where chapter 16 left off, because chapter 16 left off with Team 7, Ayara and Yodo, looking down at Ryu and Matsuri as they inspected this toad in the middle of the desert. And chapter 17 starts off inside of Sarada's mind, as Sarada remembers the interaction she had with Sumire right before leaving the village. The interaction where Sumire told Sarada to try putting herself in Boruto's shoes, where Sumire genuinely asked Sarada if she believes Boruto likes keeping stuff from them, and pushed Sarada to genuinely ponder if Boruto is struggling or not. And then Sumire continued on by saying that Sarada not only hasn't considered how Boruto feels, but also hasn't considered how Sumire feels, as Sumire believes Sarada running out to Boruto to give him a big hug when he returned was inconsiderate of her feelings because Sarada knows just how much Sumire likes Boruto. Anyways, Sarada snaps back to attention when she realizes that Mitsuki is staring at her, and as somebody who's also kind of in a weird love triangle with Boruto, I guess Mitsuki understands better than anybody what's going on with Sarada. And then we cut back to Ryu and Matsuri, who are still looking down at this toad, as Matsuri tells Ryu, according to the trees, Boruto himself put this toad here. And that's kind of huge. And I'll explain why in a second, because the plot explains why it's important. See, Ryu, perplexed by what Matsuri just said, goes, "What trees? This is a desert." To which Matsuri says, "There's trees everywhere, even deep below ground." And if you know anything about like ecology or biology, you'll know what Matsuri's saying right here is actually wrong. There isn't trees everywhere, especially in deserts. Deep underground under a desert, there may be soil, but more likely than anything, there's most likely just rock and shale. In fact, the deeper you get into the ground, the more rock it becomes. This is why drilling super deep into the earth is very difficult, because the further you get into the earth, the harder it gets. Which makes sense. The closer you get to the center of the earth, not only do you have the density and the weight of everything on top of you, but also gravity gets stronger the closer to the core you get. And therefore, the further into the globe you get, the harder things get and the less soil and trees there is. So no, there isn't root systems that run all throughout underground desert areas. There may be fungal networks, but that's also incredibly unlikely when you consider how incredibly unmoist a desert is. Nick, why are we doing Ecology 101 right now? Well, Matsuri being wrong about the idea of roots running everywhere all throughout underground, at least from like a human logistical ecological standpoint, gives credence to a theory that I've had for a while, that the Shinju's power is derived from the roots of the divine tree. Because I'd like to remind each and every single one of you, the divine tree has now grown on Earth twice, which means that the roots of two separate divine trees have had to wriggle their way through the entirety of the earth now twice. And while those divine trees were either used or stopped before they could be fully used, those root systems should still exist. And Matsuri saying that there's the roots of trees all throughout the globe, even in deserts, gives credence to that idea. But we'll be diving further into it on our next NC Hammer 23 videos, so hit the noti bell so you can know when it comes out. Anyways, we then come back to Team 7 plus Yodo and Ayara. I really need to figure out a name to call them. I hate doing the plus thing. We're gonna call them Team 7.5. 7 2/3? 7 2/3. They're Team Team 7 and 2/3. Anyways, we cut back to Team 7 and 2/3, and Ayara is somehow listening into the conversation of Ryu and Matsuri from a very, very far distance away. And she hears Matsuri say, by using the voices of the trees, we'll be able to hunt down Boruto. Now that's kind of wild. If Matsuri is tapped into an entire global network of roots that she can communicate with, that makes her one of the greatest sensor-type ninjas we've ever seen. Ayara then relays to Team 7 and 2/3 that those two definitely came here to track down Boruto. She then goes on to let Team 7 and 2/3 know that Matsuri has high-level sensor abilities, and therefore she's probably going to catch on to our presence here pretty soon. Now, none of this information necessarily catches Konohamaru off guard. He says, okay, all of this lines up with our intel, let's get moving. And it's this point that he also sees that Sarada seems distracted. So he asks her what's going on and if she's okay. But she gives herself a couple of face slaps and taps back in. Now, at this point that Ayara asks Konohamaru if we defeat Ryu and get his thorn bulb. And yeah, in the official translation, they call it a thorn bulb. I like soul thorn more. But anyways, Ayara asks, can we bring Shinki back to life? To which Konohamaru responds to by saying, apparently, if our intel is correct, that is, which kind of goes to show that Konohamaru doesn't necessarily know why he's currently in action, but he's still following orders. And this makes sense because Konohamaru is still under the effects of omnipotence, and therefore Konohamaru shouldn't know that they are actively working with Kashen Koji and Boruto. And it's this point that I'm realizing that the girl is Yodo and the guy is Ayara. Yikes. I should just call them Blindfold and Whale Tail, but here we are. Anyways, at this point, Ayara, the guy, steps in and says, Yodo, I beg you, please don't do anything reckless. And it's at this point that I'm realizing that his name is Araya, not Ayara. My God, get your shit together, Nick. As Yodo tells Araya, I'm gonna do whatever it takes to rescue Shinki. Now, Araya doesn't like this as he yells Yodo, but Yodo tells Araya to shut it, otherwise Yodo will shut him up. Now, Konohamaru says, shut the fuck up, both of you. As the last thing that he or Team 7 and 2/3 needs is Ryu and Matsuri hearing them fight. Yodo apologizes and lets Konohamaru know that they're always like this. That can't be good for team comp. And lets Konohamaru know that it won't affect the mission. Mission that starts now. So Konohamaru asks Team 7 and 2/3 if they all understand the mission, to which they all say yes, but Mitsuki says he doesn't believe it will work. But that doesn't stop Konohamaru, as he basically shushes all of Mitsuki's concerns and says, oh, whatever, we're starting it anyways. And apparently the idea from Team 7 and 2/3 is to casually walk up to Ryu and Matsuri, while leaving Yodo and Araya behind, so that it only seems as though Konoha shinobi are walking up to these two Shinju. That's it, they just walk up to him, and Konohamaru goes, hey, you, over there, to Ryu and Matsuri, two of the most powerful entities we've ever seen in the Naruto universe. Now, it's this point that Ryu turns to Matsuri and says, Elder, ninja are approaching. And we see as Matsuri realizes that the ninja that's approaching is Konohamaru. Now, I'm not gonna lie, Konohamaru's kind of killing this whole Konoha shinobi walking through the desert vibe. He looks cool, and he lets the two Shinju know that we are Konoha shinobi and we're looking for Boruto. And it's this point that Ryu turns to Matsuri and says, it looks like they don't know who we are. Like, the two of them don't have screws in their hair. But since the two of them are being so inconspicuous, Ryu turns to Matsuri and says, what's the plan, Elder? But Matsuri doesn't have a plan because she is infatuated with Konohamaru. And like I said, he does look good right now. I mean, Matsuri is blushing, falling apart. She's Play-Doh in Konohamaru's hands right now. She is head over heels, but Matsuri doesn't necessarily understand the feelings that she's feeling. Therefore, Matsuri says, I don't know what's going on with my body, Ryu. I don't feel right. How about you do the talking? And boy, oh boy, was that a mistake, because apparently Ryu has the vocabulary of a second grader. And apparently he knows that because he does not seem so happy about having to be the person who's doing the talking. Now, it's this point that we cut back to Konoha, before Team 7 and 2/3 was formed and went to the Land of Wind, so that we can see a conversation between Konohamaru and Shikamaru. And this is where things get spicy. See, because in this meeting, Shikamaru is telling Konohamaru that it's his mission to take down the Shinju. And while taking down the Shinju, the collection of their thorn bulbs is essential, because only after collecting their thorn bulbs will they be able to bring the people who were turned into trees back to life. Specifically, Shikamaru tells Konohamaru with Matsuri's thorn bulb that we'll be able to bring Moegi back to life, and Ryu's thorn bulb will bring Shinki back to life. However, if they don't collect the thorn bulb of Matsuri and Ryu will continually reincarnate, and therefore the idea of battling against any of the Shinju without the collection of their thorn bulb is useless. Thus, Shikamaru and Konohamaru come to the conclusion that because Hidari's soul thorn was able to fly away after his battle against Boruto, that Hidari is back in the world of the living. Now, Konohamaru is kind of perplexed by where Shikamaru got this information. And like, honestly, fair, because Konohamaru was the person conducting Boruto's interrogation, and therefore he knows that this is way more information than we got from Boruto's interrogation. So Shikamaru pulls a real American government when talking about drones floating over the East Coast and says, sorry, it's above your clearance. I judge the accuracy of the intel and how much of it to disclose, and if you're not okay with that, well, there's the door. There's also a window behind me, but that's kind of a bigger fall. But Konohamaru, forever the perfect soldier with no free will of his own, says, yeah, okay, that's fine. And it's this point that it's revealed that Shikamaru's now got a pretty permanent Kashen Koji toad on his shoulder. So Shikamaru is in cahoots with Team Boruto now, full time. Now, at this point, the Shikamaru decides to get into the planning aspect of his conversation with Konohamaru. And to everybody who believes that Shikamaru is always going to be the moral guiding light in the world, I wouldn't recommend listening to this part of the story, because Konohamaru's plan, let's just say, isn't something that Naruto would have approved of. And well, Shikamaru knows that. Shikamaru goes on to tell Konohamaru about how the Divine Trees, or the Shinjus, all have incredibly high combat potentials, and each and every single one of them has a target they want to devour. Hidari wants to devour Sarada, Matsuri wants to devour Konohamaru, so on and so forth. So naturally, Shikamaru says we have to consider them as foes and treat them as such. If they want to eat ninjas from our village, yeah, they're our ops. That's just the way that it works. Now, at this point, the Shikamaru dips into his big boy word bag as he says, and I quote, "Yet this antagonistic relationship is relative. There is no conclusive evidence that these Shinju are intrinsically evil." Those are 13-point words there, Shikamaru. Good job. Proud of you. But basically, in layman terms, what Shikamaru is saying here is we have no proof that the Shinju are actually evil. In fact, we have more proof of kind of the exact opposite. And rather than considering them evil, we should actually consider them more akin to newly born offspring wild beasts, like a couple-hour-old lion. Yes, when this lion fully matures, it will be an absolute force of nature, and the instincts to become that killer in the beast exist in this baby lion. But if you're a daring enough gay couple with no real regard for their own safety, maybe you can train those instincts out of it. Reed and Roy? Am I old? Anyways, this line of logic seems to confuse Konohamaru as he says, wild beasts, cubs? So Konohamaru continues by saying, I don't think they have evil intent. For the current moment, they seem as though they're just acting purely from instinct. But because they have great strength, they pose a great threat to us. And so Konohamaru, who's a little slow on the uptake, says, but yeah, that doesn't change anything. We still need to defeat them. Right? Where are you going with all of this? And it's at this point that Shikamaru throws the curveball that saves this entire chapter from being a useless yap fest. As Shikamaru, as deadpan as possible, looks Konohamaru in the face and says, friends, Konohamaru, we have to befriend them. We have to tame these wild beasts while they're still cubs. And in this moment, I was like, oh my god, is Konoha gonna recruit the Shinju for a battle against some greater force? That would be wild. That would be like actively guaranteeing that Moegi and Shinki and Bug and Sasuke never see the light of day because their Shinju versions are just stronger than them. I mean, I understand it. Do we need Moegi back in the story? No. Matsuri probably serves a greater purpose. But then Shikamaru hit me with a and then betray them. Yes, you heard it here first. Shikamaru wants to use the power of friendship and then stab newfound friends in the back. Listen, to some of you, you might be like, oh yeah, of course, that's super logical. Use the innocence of these Shinju and the fact that they don't understand human deceit to make them believe that we're friends, and when they drop their guards, kill them, steal their soul thorns, and bring back our real friends. And yes, the plan does make a fair amount of sense. However, that is the least Naruto plan I have ever heard. Naruto's plan for this would be befriend the Shinju, make them realize that their existence comes at the cost of other people's existence, and make them give up their soul thorns of their own volition. But nope! Shikamaru just said, we're gonna trick these simple idiots, and when they're not looking, we're gonna stab them in the chest. And Shikamaru knows this is kind of evil, as he sees Konohamaru's reaction to this plan and says, did your heart just reel a little bit? Don't allow it to. This is a perfect plan if you truly consider those Shinju your foes. Get them to drop their guards, and once they do so, and like, he's right, if we do consider the Shinju as straight up our enemies. This is probably how a ninja would go about it. This is ninja planning. Ninjas are supposed to represent an inferior power. They were rebels trying to fight against greater powers. They used guerrilla tactics, underhanded means, honeypots, covert assassinations, and poison. Ninjas did whatever they could to accomplish their goal. And for the first time in history, Konoha doesn't have the outright strength to win against a superior force, so they need to use underhanded methods. And you as the reader are supposed to feel ucky about it, because this is not how Naruto, the main character of this entire universe, would go about completing this. But Naruto is not here. God is God, which means man's gotta figure it out on his own. And Shikamaru knows this. Shikamaru says Naruto probably wouldn't like this solution, but I'm not Naruto. I propose this tactic to get rid of these superhuman monsters for the survival of humankind. And that, oh, I got chills reading it, dude. That is hard. Listen, whether you like it or not, that's Danzo type moves right there. However, Shikamaru has the ability to plan, unlike Danzo, who all of his plans ended up blowing back up into his face. And so we cut back to Team 7, who's not with their 2/3 right now because their 2/3 are known by Matsuri to be the enemies, as Konohamaru is introducing Team 7 to Ryu and Matsuri, as he says, I'm Commander Konohamaru, that's Mitsuki, and that's Sarada. And you are? And it's at this point that Ryu says, and I'm Ryu. And this is, and he looks to Matsuri so that she can introduce herself, but Matsuri's cowering behind Ryu, and Ryu asks Elder Matsuri, is everything okay? Matsuri doesn't seem to know. Now, to this point that there seems to be a pretty substantial switch in the personalities of both Ryu and Matsuri, at least so far as we understood them, because at this moment in time, both Ryu and Matsuri seem to get substantially younger, and that's kind of cool. See, when Ryu and Matsuri are being directed by Jura, and they're doing things like cutting off Code's hands and battling against the New Age Sand siblings and Gaara, seem so adult. But what the chapter is trying to establish to us is that every time that we've seen the Shinju move like they knew what they were doing, that was just their bestial instincts guiding them. And on a personality basis, really the only one amongst them that operates anything like an adult is Jura. And Team 7 2/3 plans on taking advantage of that. Kind of like stealing candy from overpowered babies. And thus Konohamaru says, oh, Ryu and Matsuri, nice to meet you. I see you're also looking for Boruto. Maybe we should team up. And thus Ryu turns to Matsuri and says, what should we do, Elder? And Matsuri, muffled behind his shoulder, says, yeah, sure, I guess. And thus Konohamaru takes one knee onto the ground to look at the toad that both Ryu and Matsuri are checking out, as he tells Ryu and Matsuri that this toad is a spy used by Boruto and his accomplices. We need to investigate what's going on here. And at this point that Mitsuki from a distance says, partner, I also found this piece of metal. It's like the kind of piece of metal that Boruto uses to jump to different locations. And that's Chekhov's gun if literally I've ever seen one. See, my biggest concern when I saw Ryu and Matsuri poking at this toad a month ago was that it didn't appear to have any of the pieces of metal, usually pins, that Boruto uses to jump to different locations. However, apparently it was just a couple dozen feet away. Now, while it will be later revealed in this chapter that Boruto is strictly forbidden from interfering in this fight, the fact that Boruto has a way to enter this fight literally whenever he wants to through that piece of metal seems to tell me that Boruto isn't going to be listening to the rules for too long, which is what the video after our next video is gonna be about, so make sure you hit the next button. Now, it's this point that Ryu reveals that he has the mentality of a child, because in response to Mitsuki's findings, he says, for reals? This is an entity that strong-armed Code, who is supposed to be one of the strongest people in the history of Naruto, and he's saying, for reals. And this Konohamaru says, well, we may find other clues. Maybe we should comb this area. Let's split up. Sarada, Mitsuki, check that area over there with Ryu. And it's at this point that he looks up from his toad inspection and says, you're Matsuri, right? What's the matter? Not feeling well, as he hits her with quite literally the firmest blue steel I've ever seen in manga. Now Matsuri, who's blushing visibly at this point, thinks to herself, for some reason I'm having trouble breathing. Why? What's going on? What's wrong with me? And Sarada does her best job at dangling shiny keys in front of Ryu's face and saying, we might find more stuff pertaining to Boruto's location over here, Ryu. Come this way, away from Matsuri. And Ryu is tricked immediately as he says, for reals? Maybe he's still in the vicinity. Mitsuki also hops in on the fun and says, yes, and our other comrades are over here. We'll introduce you to them. Now, the idea of Ryu being reintroduced to the Sand siblings opens a lot of very interesting possible doors. See, because while Ryu doesn't necessarily want to consume Yodo or Areya, Matsuri's reaction to Konohamaru proves that the Shinju hold on to some of the emotions that the humans that they were made from had. And therefore, maybe Ryu will recognize in some capacity Yodo and Areya, which would make pulling the wool over his eyes and ripping out his heart even easier. But Ryu is kind of concerned about Matsuri as he turns back and says, but Elder Matsuri. But Konohamaru, kind of like Fred sneaking off with Daphne and Velma, says, hey, Scooby Shack, don't worry. We got upstairs covered. And it's at this point that Sarada says, see, our commander has everything covered. Let's go, Ryu. And Ryu seems really happy about this. In fact, he literally says, phew, what a relief. You ninjas are seriously nice peeps. And then he says something very interesting, which is, just like I was told. Now this confuses Sarada as she turns back and says, huh? As Ryu tells Sarada, yeah, Elder Jura's full of respect for you peeps. He's our boss man. And this is really interesting. See, because we've understood for a long time that Jura has a healthy amount of respect for Konoha as a place of learning. And we also know that Jura pretty actively tries to avoid conflict. But what Ryu is telling us here is that Jura not only has respect for Konoha as a place of learning, but also for all of the ninja that come from it, which opens the door on a somewhat interesting possibility that maybe Jura could also have the wool pulled over his eyes, or maybe that Jura could be convinced into becoming an ally. However, it's this point that Ryu kind of confirms why we're trying to pull the wool over the eyes of these divine tree living beings, as he tells Mitsuki and Sarada, you know, I was just intending on slaughtering any and all ninja that I ran into, so I'm happy you guys talked to me first. And Sarada takes this in stride by saying, oh gee, don't say that. And like, fair, I don't know how I would respond to that either. Now it's at this point that we cut back to Araya and Yodo, and we see that they're lying in wait, waiting for Mitsuki and Sarada to feed Ryu to them, essentially creating a 4 versus 1 in which they can kill him and save Shinki. But before we see this jump no jutsu go on, and my god, is Naruto so back? We're back to jumping bad guys. We once again cut back to the conversation between Shikamaru and Konohamaru. Shikamaru tells Konohamaru before he leaves to set out for the mission, Konohamaru, there was a reason you were picked for this mission. Do you know why you're Matsuri's target? It's because she bears romantic feelings towards you. Now this throws the incredibly oblivious Konohamaru off, and Shikamaru continues on by saying it seems as though she herself is not aware of these feelings, or rather, she has no idea what the emotion she's feeling is. So this plan may put her into a state of turmoil, and if it does, that gives us a favorable edge. Now once again, Konohamaru, who is somehow the moral compass in this conversation, goes, isn't that a bit much? But Shikamaru once again establishes where he's coming from in this conversation as he tells Konohamaru, hey, be heartless. The divine trees are our enemies. According to the intel, either Ryu or Matsuri will show up to the scene of this toad, and it might be both of them. But if you have to fight both of them at the same time, that will not go well for you. So you will need to find a way to separate them as amicably as possible. Take charge of the situation. And thus we cut back to Konohamaru, who's staring at a Matsuri, who's staring at him, blushing so hard that I genuinely think she might have a fever, as he says, you look like you need a break. Do you want to go somewhere and talk? And thus we cut to Konohamaru and Matsuri sitting side by side, presumably pretty far from Ryu and the rest of Team 7 2/3. Konohamaru then asks Matsuri, well, are you feeling any better? And she tells Konohamaru, I don't know. This is just so not like me. And Konohamaru stares at her as she goes through these feelings of love and longing, and you can see the inability to pull off this mission in any feasible capacity quite literally running down Konohamaru's face. As he asks her, you sure about that? As he tells her, I don't think it's necessarily that weird for you to get this way. And it's like, hey, Konohamaru, Ryu and Matsuri are split up right now. You can get to killing her if you want to. You don't need to hold a conversation with her to make yourself feel even worse about what you need to do. But Konohamaru is also supposed to be the closest thing we have to Naruto in the Boruto world right now. So the idea that he was ever going to be able to pull off this plan, which is essentially deceiving a child who's in love with him so that he can kill it, was not our best bet. Now, to this point in the conversation that we cut to Ada, and she, just like Shikamaru, has accessorized with the latest in fashion, a Kashen Koji toad on her shoulder. And Kashen Koji is talking to her through this toad and is saying, hey, I don't know what's going on in the land of wind. Can you take a look for me, Ada? But she responds to Kashen Koji by saying, well, but what about that geezer? Talking about Bug Shinju. And it's at this point that Kashen Koji eases her worries by saying Mamushi, which is apparently the Bug Shinju's name, should be at their base, so there's no chance that he sees you. And Ada tells him that he better not be wrong and activates her Senryugan. It's at this point that we see Boruto and Kashen Koji hanging out in their Orochimaru hideout. As Kashen Koji tells Boruto, it seems to be going well up until this point. They've managed to separate Ryu and Matsuri, Matsuri. Boruto then asks Kashen Koji what happens next. And Kashen Koji responds by saying Konohamaru is keeping Matsuri occupied. Ideally, Sarada and the rest will be able to cut down Ryu, and then they can rendezvous with Konohamaru to all fight against Matsuri simultaneously. Seems to imply that Kashen Koji knows that Ryu is weaker than Matsuri. And while that's not the craziest thing I've ever heard, I mean, obviously Ryu defers to Matsuri for all decision making and calls her Elder Matsuri, you could very easily argue that the reason that Ryu does this in the first place is just because Matsuri was made before Ryu. Matsuri doesn't necessarily have any feats. Ryu's already established himself as stronger than Code. On top of this, while Moegi is a Jonin and Shinki is a Chunin or a Genin, I have no hesitancy in me when I say Shinki could probably beat Moegi in a fight. So the idea that Ryu is weaker than Matsuri is kind of perplexing, but I guess that's the way it goes. Or Kashen Koji just doesn't believe that Konohamaru would be able to defeat any Shinju in one-on-one combat, regardless of how in love with him they were. Boruto then asks Kashen Koji, what's the chance that they fail? Percentage-wise. And this is kind of an interesting question, because if you remember how the 10 paths work, they allow for Kashen Koji to see all possible futures. And therefore, it does actually make a fair amount of sense that Kashen Koji is able to identify the percentage of a likelihood of a possible future occurring. Because it could be like, oh, in 300,000 of the 1 million possible futures, they lose, which means they have a 70% chance of surviving. Kashen Koji answers somewhat ambiguously, as he tells Boruto, not that high. And this does not sit well with Boruto, as he stares down at Kashen Koji with daggers in his eyes and says, don't lie to me, I said give me a number. Kashen Koji once again ducks the question and says, regardless, you're not to go, Boruto. Just like with Himawari leaving Konoha, if you were to take part in this battle, Jura would make a move. And if that happens, you will die this time. And I find this very interesting, not only from a plot perspective, but also from a writing perspective. There's a lot of things in play here. Kashen Koji is saying that if Boruto goes to help in the battle against Ryu and Matsuri, Jura will make a move against Boruto, and Boruto will not win that fight without the help of Kawaki. And since Kawaki is currently not with Team 7 in 2/3, Boruto loses that 1v1 with Jura. Now, as to how Jura would know that Boruto made a move against Ryu and Matsuri, I can't necessarily say outside of the idea that maybe he's an incredible sensor, and considering the fact that he was able to trace the tracest amount of Kurama's chakra in Himawari from countries away. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. I mean, even Himawari didn't know that Kurama's chakra was inside of her. So this seems to imply that Boruto's not going to be involved in this upcoming fight. Even though we do kind of have the Chekhov's gun of the piece of metal that he can jump to at any point on location of where this fight's going to occur. And thus, from a plot perspective, Boruto is put into a situation where he can help, but is being told that he shouldn't. And I don't know if you guys have ever watched anime or read manga, but I'm assuming that this battle against Ryu and Matsuri isn't going to go the exact way that Shikamaru planned it. And in a situation where maybe Sarada, Mitsuki, or Konohamaru are going to be placed in danger at the hands of either Ryu or Matsuri, I believe Boruto's going to have to break some rules to go and save the day. And while narratively this would make a fair amount of sense based off what's been built up, from a plot perspective, I don't know if I agree with that choice. See, barring Boruto from this fight actually would do a really good job of establishing Sarada and Mitsuki as more concrete characters. While we have seen both Mitsuki and Sarada fight since the time skip, giving Mitsuki and Sarada a fight that has absolutely nothing to do with Boruto would do a really good job at bringing them to the forefront of the storytelling. And if we cast all of that aside simply for Boruto to sweep in and save the day, I don't know. To me, that would technically be weaker storytelling. But with everything that's built up, I do genuinely believe that's most likely what's going to happen. But we'll have to wait and see. Maybe I'll make an entire video talking about it. Who knows? Hit the noti bell just in case. Anyways, Kashen Koji continues on by saying, you are the one thing we cannot lose. And it's at this point that we cut back to the first page that was leaked by the official Boruto team, which shows Jura shopping in a bookstore in Konoha. However, on the next page, we see that the sensory unit has now identified Jura's chakra signature in the center of Konoha, and they're calling up Shikamaru to see what they should do. And Shikamaru tells them, ignore him. Leave him alone. In fact, don't send anybody there and don't clear out the civilians. And so Jura, like Ada and Daemon, just gets to exist in Konoha because Konoha is too weak to take them on. And thus we cut back to Jura, who's slapping a pile of books on the counter in front of the bookstore clerk and throwing a fat wad of cash on the table. Now I tried to see who was on the face of this dollar bill. Like I wanted to see if like, oh, it's Hashirama or Tobirama or just any of the Hokage or somebody important. Because I think that'd be like a cool little Easter egg. But nope, it just kind of looks like the Lorax. Anyways, Jura tells the bookstore clerk, hold the change. It's an advance to be applied to all of my future purchases. And while that's an incredible power move and kind of sick, one question, where did Jura get money? Did he make it? Did he steal it? Did he kill somebody for it? Because he's got like a lot. Like, things are good in Jura Town. Like, I get that Matsuri controls trees and money is made of trees, but they got a printing press back there? But clearly the bookstore clerk was prepped in the way that Kashen Koji told Shikamaru to make sure all the bookstore clerks were prepped, as he, even though he is startled, says, of course, looking forward to seeing you next time. And then we cut to Amado, who's sitting in his laboratory. And as Amado goes to light the world's shortest cigarette, a hand reaches over his shoulder and snags it out of his mouth. And that hand belongs to none other than Kawaki. And honestly, the fact that it took Kawaki 2 chapters to get to Amado when Boruto sat him down and was like, oh yeah, Amado is the reason you've been getting your ass kicked recently, is kind of surprising. So if we were gonna close out this chapter without Kawaki confronting Amado, I would have been very confused. And Kawaki escalates the conflict from simply grabbing out Amado's cigarette to grabbing him by the throat and slamming him against the wall with one of his shinobi-wear augmented arms as Amado chokes out, ugh, I thought you'd be coming by. And the chapter ends with Kawaki telling Amado, I got tons of questions I need to ask you, but first, you're gonna draw up my power to its fullest extent. And with that, chapter 17 ends, which means in chapter 18, we may see the full power Kawaki finally emerge. We also may get a crazy exposition dump from Amado, most likely surrounding his intentions and what's going on with Akebi. And therefore, the yapping may not be quite over yet. But that's not a bad thing. I don't like how people talk about talking focused chapters. We got to see into the true feelings of Shikamaru as a Hokage in this chapter. It got set up in this chapter that Kawaki's gonna reach the fullest extent of his powers and possibly press his luck against Jura in the upcoming chapters. There are morally gray decisions being made that may have dire consequences for Konoha down the line. Because here's the thing, if we've identified that the Shinju are not intrinsically evil, and we've also identified that they have a lot of respect for Konoha as shinobi and are therefore possibly befriendable, could we necessarily blame Jura if he freaks out and destroys Konoha when he finds out that Konoha shinobi falsely befriended some of his friends, his possible children, just so that they could be destroyed? Yes, there was only one punch necessarily thrown this entire chapter, and that was Amado's back throwing a punch against the wall. But to set up greatness, you need to set up. So I very much enjoyed this chapter, but I'm curious to hear from you guys. Did you very much enjoy this chapter? Are you excited for the future of what Two Blue Vortex is to bring? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Also, yapping chapters give me more to talk about.